Far above, the sun melted into the horizon, sending long ribbons of orange and gold through the water. The light traveled softly, brushing against coral, passing over smooth stones, and finally reaching the tall green pillars of the kelp forest. Here everything shimmered not brightly, but gently, like the final sigh of the day. The kelp leaves swayed with a slow rhythm, whispering secrets to one another as the tide began to settle. Small sea snails tucked themselves into the folds of the fronds, and tiny bubbles rose toward the fading sky, vanishing one by one. SpongeBob swam quietly through it all, his net folded under one arm, his eyes wide and peaceful. He wasn't here to catch anything tonight, he was here to listen. He loved the kelp forest in the evening, that magical time when light turned to shadow and sound turned to silence. Every movement felt slower here, more deliberate, as if the world beneath the waves was taking a deep breath before sleep. He floated past clusters of seaweed, the tips glowing faintly blue where bioluminescent plankton had begun to stir. The gentle shimmer reminded him of firefly stories he'd once heard about from visiting travelers. He couldn't imagine bugs that lived in the air, but he thought they must feel like this, quiet, glowing, and alive in the night. Somewhere in the distance, a reef bell chimed a soft, echoing tone that rippled through the water. It was used to guide ships away from the rocks near jellyfish fields, but out here, it sounded more like a lullaby. The kelp seemed to move in time with it, swaying like dancers in slow motion. SpongeBob smiled to himself and whispered, "Good night, ocean." His voice was small, almost carried away by the current, but the forest seemed to hear him. A gentle hush passed through the leaves, and even the sand beneath him seemed to grow still. He looked up through the green canopy above, watching the last traces of sunlight turn to soft indigo. Somewhere far above, the surface shimmered like glass. He wondered if the stars were out yet, and if they could see him here, deep below, floating among the kelp. For a long moment, he just hovered in place. The quiet was deep, but not empty. It was full of little sounds, the pop of a distant bubble, the faint crackle of coral breathing, the sleepy sigh of the tide. Together they formed a song without words, one that SpongeBob had heard 100 times and still never grew tired of. As the light faded, the forest began to glow in its own way. Small orbs of blue and green light pulsed from the sand. Jellyfish drifted lazily between the kelp stalks, their bodies like floating lanterns. The world had changed colors, no longer golden, but silver and cool, like a dream beginning to form. SpongeBob reached out to touch one of the kelp leaves. It felt soft and slick beneath his fingers, moving gently with the water. The leaf brushed back against his hand, almost like a wave, hello, or maybe good night. He laughed quietly. "See you in the morning," he said to it. And then he drifted deeper into the forest. The shadows stretched long around him, but they weren't scary, just sleepy. Even the rocks seemed softer now, their edges blurred by moss and sea light. He passed a small patch of sea anemones, all closed for the night. Earlier they had been open and bright pink, waving in the current. Now they looked like folded pillows resting on the sea floor. The forest had a rhythm to its rest. Everything moved, but slower. Everything breathed, but quieter. It was as though the whole ocean was settling down, ready to dream. And in the middle of it all, SpongeBob felt small, but in the best way, like a tiny part of something big and kind. He could feel the calm sinking into him the same way the light sank into the sand. The kelp forest hummed faintly, the last light slipping away, and SpongeBob, with eyes soft and heart full, followed the glow deeper into the night. SpongeBob's path wound deeper between the tall stalks of kelp, where the water felt cooler and time seemed slower. He could feel the gentle tug of the current, brushing against his sleeves, carrying the faint scent of salt and seagrass. It was the kind of calm that made you want to stop moving entirely, just float and listen and be. Above him, the kelp leaves rippled like long curtains in the wind. Every now and then a lazy sea snail or drowsy crab peeked out, blinking slowly before curling back into rest. The deeper he went, the more the world seemed to melt into softness. He passed a rock shaped like a crescent moon, smooth and polished by years of waves. Little barnacles clung to its sides, and soft coral had grown over it in patches. SpongeBob brushed his fingers over it lightly, tracing its curve. It reminded him of bedtime stories of the moon that watched over the sea, guarding dreams until morning. He smiled at the thought. "Good night, Moon Rock," he whispered, and then laughed quietly at himself. He liked talking to things: coral, stones, shells, even the current. Somehow everything felt alive here. And maybe, in a way, it was. A school of tiny fish glided past him, glowing faintly as they turned in unison. They moved like one mind, one thought, one dream. Their scales caught the last traces of light, scattering it into 100 little sparkles. It was as if stars had fallen to the water and decided to swim for a while. SpongeBob stopped to watch them go. He didn't follow. He just let the moment linger. The silence that followed was sweet, like the quiet after laughter, or the hush that fills a room after someone says something kind. Somewhere above, a ray of light flickered through the canopy and landed on his hand. He watched it fade slowly, the last golden thread disappearing into the deeper blue. "That's it," he murmured. "The day's gone." But he didn't feel sad. The night was just beginning its own kind of beauty. As he moved farther into the forest, the bioluminescence grew brighter, little orbs of light pulsing in rhythm with the heartbeat of the sea. Some grew from the roots of kelp, some drifted freely like dust motes in the current. When SpongeBob passed through them, they glowed a bit stronger, as though greeting him. He began to hum softly an old tune from Jellyfish Fields, slow and wordless. The sound didn't travel far, but it mingled with the gentle clicking of distant shrimp and the soft sigh of sand being moved by waves. It was peaceful in a way that made him feel weightless. Every sound, every motion, was part of something delicate and ancient. The deeper he swam, the less he saw of the world above. There were no lights now except the ones the forest made for itself, and it was enough, more than enough. He passed by a hollowed log resting on the seafloor. Once it had been a hiding spot for baby fish. Now it was covered in mossy green, with small starfish pressed against it like sleepy ornaments. One of them had tiny white specks that shimmered faintly, glowing in tune with the forest. SpongeBob hovered nearby for a while, his eyes tracing every small detail. He didn't need to speak. Just being there, breathing in that soft silence, felt like part of the story. Somewhere in the distance, a current rolled through the forest, carrying the low hum of whales passing far away. The sound arrived like a deep note from the heart of the ocean, slow, round, endless. The kelp swayed in response, bowing gently with each vibration. SpongeBob closed his eyes for a moment, listening. He didn't understand the language of whales, but he liked to imagine they were saying goodnight to the sea, to the stars, to everything still awake down below. He drifted along the edge of the current until it faded, and when he opened his eyes again, the light had shifted once more. Now the forest was tinted with deeper blue, and the sand glowed faintly silver beneath him. He could feel something, not fear, not even excitement, just a sense of peace, The ocean felt alive around him, whispering without words. He passed one more stretch of tall kelp, and when he looked up, he saw the surface far above, faintly reflecting the last light of the day. For a brief second, it looked like the sky had flipped the seafloor below him, becoming the stars, the sky above becoming the deep. It made him smile. Everything looked sleepy, he whispered. And it was true, even the world itself seemed ready to dream. The kelp above swayed like sleepy curtains, their tips brushing one another in a slow dance. Each movement sent a shimmer of plankton dust spiraling through the water, tiny flecks of light that rose and vanished before reaching the surface. It was like watching snowfall in reverse, falling upward into dreams instead of down to the ground. SpongeBob's breathing came slow and steady. He didn't even notice when he stopped kicking his legs. The water carried him now, the soft tide guiding him gently between the tall kelp stalks. Every inch of this place seemed alive, but not awake. It was resting, and he was a guest in its quiet world. He reached a clearing, a small open patch of sand surrounded by waving kelp. In the center sat a large rock, shaped almost like a chair, worn smooth by centuries of current. SpongeBob floated toward it and settled down, crossing his arms on his knees. The sand puffed softly beneath him, and the sound reminded him of the first yawn before sleep. He looked around. The kelp forest stretched far into the dark, endless lines of green, fading into deep blue shadow. Some of the taller stalks reached toward the surface, their ends vanishing into the faint glow above. Between them drifted bubbles, glimmering like glass beads. He watched one bubble rise all the way to the top, twisting and catching light until it disappeared. "Good night, little bubble," he said softly. The forest didn't answer, but it seemed to sigh with him. Somewhere behind him, a hermit crab dragged its shell across the sand, the sound like a gentle scrape on stone. It stopped near the edge of the clearing, half tucked under a kelp leaf, and turned slowly, as if to look at him. SpongeBob waved. The crab didn't move for a moment, then lifted one claw slightly, like a drowsy wave back, before crawling into the shadows again. SpongeBob smiled. Even the crabs are sleepy tonight. He rested his chin on his hands and watched the light shift across the sand. It wasn't bright enough to see colors now, just tones of blue, green, and soft gray. The forest glowed the way dreams do, not clear but comforting. For a while, SpongeBob didn't move at all. The world around him felt timeless, caught in that space between the end of day and the start of night. If he listened closely, he could almost hear the forest breathing long, slow breaths through water and leaf. He thought about how many nights it must have seen, how many sunsets had passed through these same kelp strands, how many creatures had fallen asleep under the same glow. The forest wasn't just old, it was eternal in a quiet way. He closed his eyes and listened harder. Somewhere above, a faint shimmer of sound, maybe a school of fish turning, or the distant hum of a boat light fading over the reef. Closer, the water made tiny sounds as it passed through the kelp, like wind in tall grass. The seafloor shifted softly beneath him, grains of sand rolling with each gentle push of the current. Everything moved in rhythm, but nothing hurried. It reminded SpongeBob of something Squidward had once said, that the ocean was like music. Every wave, every drift, every heartbeat had its own tempo, and if you sat quietly long enough, you could hear the whole song. He smiled at the memory. Maybe Squidward was right. Maybe even he needed to sit still sometimes to hear it. A cluster of small jellyfish floated into view, glowing faintly pink and white. They drifted by in a lazy line, their tendrils swaying behind them like ribbons in the current. SpongeBob didn't move, he just watched. They looked like dreams moving past, soft and untouchable. As they passed the clearing, one of the smaller jellies hovered for a moment near him, its light pulsing softly. SpongeBob reached out a gentle hand. The jellyfish brushed against his glove for half a second, not a sting, just warmth before it turned and followed the others. SpongeBob whispered, "Good night, little jelly." The forest grew quieter still. Above him, the last hint of surface light faded completely, leaving only the glow of the sea itself. Everything shimmered faintly rocks, kelp all touched by bioluminescent dust. The world looked asleep, but it was glowing from within, alive in its dreaming. SpongeBob leaned back against the smooth rock, letting his gaze wander upward. He could almost imagine the stars above the surface, matching the lights down here. One sea of stars above, another below. He sighed softly, not tired but peaceful. And as the water moved gently through the forest, he felt it carry a story older than words, the kind that isn't told aloud, but felt deep in the chest, slow as the tide. The kelp above swayed like sleepy curtains, their tips brushing one another in a slow dance. Each movement sent a shimmer of plankton dust, spiraling through the water, tiny flecks of light that rose and vanished before reaching the surface. It was like watching snowfall in reverse, falling upward into dreams instead of down to the ground. SpongeBob's breathing came slow and steady. He didn't even notice when he stopped kicking his legs. The water carried him now, the soft tide guiding him gently between the tall kelp stalks. Every inch of this place seemed alive, but not awake. It was resting, and he was a guest in its quiet world. He reached a clearing, a small open patch of sand surrounded by waving kelp. In the center sat a large rock, shaped almost like a chair, worn smooth by centuries of current. SpongeBob floated toward it and settled down, crossing his arms on his knees. The sand puffed softly beneath him, and the sound reminded him of the first yawn before sleep. He looked around. The kelp forest stretched far into the dark, endless lines of green, fading into deep blue shadow. Some of the taller stalks reached toward the surface, their ends vanishing into the faint glow above. Between them drifted bubbles, glimmering like glass beads. He watched one bubble rise all the way to the top, twisting and catching light until it disappeared. "Good night, little bubble," he said softly. The forest didn't answer, but it seemed to sigh with him. Somewhere behind him, a hermit crab dragged its shell across the sand, the sound like a gentle scrape on stone. It stopped near the edge of the clearing, half tucked under a kelp leaf, and turned slowly as if to look at him. SpongeBob waved. The crab didn't move for a moment, then lifted one claw slightly, like a drowsy wave back, before crawling into the shadows again. SpongeBob smiled. Even the crabs are sleepy tonight. He rested his chin on his hands and watched the light shift across the sand. It wasn't bright enough to see colors now, just tones of blue, green, and soft gray. The forest glowed the way dreams do, not clear, but comforting. For a while, SpongeBob didn't move at all. The world around him felt timeless, caught in that space between the end of day and the start of night. If he listened closely, he could almost hear the forest breathing long, slow breaths through water and leaf. He thought about how many nights it must have seen, how many sunsets had passed through these same kelp strands, how many creatures had fallen asleep under the same glow. The forest wasn't just old, it was eternal in a quiet way. He closed his eyes and listened harder. Somewhere above, a faint shimmer of sound, maybe a school of fish turning, or the distant hum of a boat light fading over the reef. Closer, the water made tiny sounds as it passed through the kelp, like wind in tall grass. The seafloor shifted softly beneath him, grains of sand rolling with each gentle push of the current. Everything moved in rhythm, but nothing hurried. It reminded SpongeBob of something Squidward had once said, that the ocean was like music. Every wave, every drift, every heartbeat had its own tempo, and if you sat quietly long enough, you could hear the whole song. He smiled at the memory. Maybe Squidward was right. Maybe even he needed to sit still sometimes to hear it. A cluster of small jellyfish floated into view, glowing faintly pink and white. They drifted by in a lazy line, the tendrils swaying behind them like ribbons in the current. SpongeBob didn't move, he just watched. They looked like dreams moving past, soft and untouchable. As they passed the clearing, one of the smaller jellies hovered for a moment near him, its light pulsing softly. SpongeBob reached out a gentle hand. The jellyfish brushed against his glove for half a second, not a sting, just warmth before it turned and followed the others. SpongeBob whispered, "Good night, little jelly." The forest grew quieter still. Above him, the last hint of surface light faded completely, leaving only the glow of the sea itself. Everything shimmered faintly rocks, sand kelp all touched by bioluminescent dust. The world looked asleep, but it was glowing from within, alive in its dreaming. SpongeBob leaned back against the smooth rock, letting his gaze wander upward. He could almost imagine the stars above the surface matching the lights down here. One sea of stars above, another below. He sighed softly, not tired, but peaceful. And as the water moved gently through the forest, he felt it carry a story older than words. The kind that isn't told aloud, but felt deep in the chest, slow as the tide. The water thickened with darkness, yet it felt safe, like being wrapped in a soft blanket of blue. Every sound now was muted, distant like whispers through pillows. SpongeBob floated lower, close enough that his fingers brushed the soft seafloor. The grains of sand were cool against his gloves, smooth as sleep. The kelp above him swayed slower now, heavy with night. Each long leaf caught faint glimmers of light, glowing at the edges. It was as if the forest itself had decided to rest, and the whole ocean was holding its breath to let it dream. A sleepy current drifted past, carrying tiny motes of glowing plankton. They spun lazily around SpongeBob's face, painting little stars across his cheeks. He blinked once, then twice they drifted away like fireflies in the dark. Somewhere deeper in the forest, a soft hum rose. Not a machine, not a song, something older, lower. Maybe the sound of the earth itself, or the voice of the tide beneath everything. It pulsed gently and like a heartbeat under layers of sand. SpongeBob listened. He didn't try to understand it. He just let it fill the silence. He thought about how, during the day, everything in Bikini Bottom felt busy and bright. Krusty Krab orders flying, Squidward sighing, Patrick laughing, Sandy tinkering. Life was loud and fast. But here, in this blue quiet, the world was slower, rounder, softer. It felt like remembering something kind. He realized he hadn't spoken for a while. The forest didn't need words. It was the kind of place that spoke through stillness. A small fish swam past, glowing faintly orange. It darted between the kelp strands, stopped to look at him, then vanished into the dark again. Its tail left a brief streak of light behind, like someone writing a name in the air and letting it fade. SpongeBob whispered to himself, "Everything glows when it slows down." He wasn't sure where that thought came from, but it made him smile. He leaned back again, resting his head against the smooth rock. The ocean hummed around him, the rhythm of distant waves above the forest's roof. For a moment he imagined he could hear the surface, the whisper of wind, the call of a seagull somewhere far above. But here everything was calm. A strand of kelp brushed his shoulder gently, like a parent tucking in a child. He pulled his arms close, curling slightly. The water was cool, but not cold, the kind of temperature that made you sleepy. His eyelids drooped. The light around him flickered softly, dimming with the pulse of the water. The bioluminescent glow was fading too, turning from blue to green, then to faint gold. It looked almost like candlelight in the dark. He murmured a quiet goodnight, not to anyone in particular, just to the sea itself. The forest seemed to murmur back. The kelp waved once, slowly, and then went still. The hum beneath him softened, stretching out into a low, steady tone like a lullaby made of water and sand. SpongeBob's thoughts began to drift. He saw flashes of his day, the laughter at the Krusty Krab, the bubbling fryer, Squidward's clarinet drifting through the windows, Gary's meow echoing faintly from home. But those memories melted into colors and then into shapes and then into quiet. The last thing he saw before sleep was a small light flickering above the kelp canopy. Maybe it was a reflection from the moon, maybe just a jellyfish. But in his half-dreaming state, it looked like a star that had fallen to the sea to keep him company. He smiled faintly, his eyes closing completely. The current rocked him gently like a cradle. And in that vast, glowing forest beneath the ocean, the night deepened. The kelp swayed slower still, the sand settled. The plankton faded until everything became one single color of calm. The ocean sang its quiet song, the one that only the sea creatures could hear, the song that tells the coral to sleep, the waves to rest, and the tide to turn softly toward morning. Far above, through layers of blue and silence, the surface gleamed faintly with the first trace of moonlight. The stars shimmered, and for one brief, tender moment, it was impossible to tell where the sky ended and the sea began. Down below, SpongeBob dreamed in peace. No alarms, no fryers, no rush, just the heartbeat of the ocean. And the kelp forest kept watch, glowing faintly through the hours until dawn would find it again, the last light fading, only to return once more. Each leaf moved slow and patient, brushing against the next with a soft, whispering sound. It wasn't quite speech, not really, more like the ocean's way of thinking out loud. SpongeBob floated near the middle of the forest where the light from the surface could barely reach. The glow that lingered came from tiny plankton and the occasional flicker of a jellyfish passing far away. Everything around him felt alive, but not awake, the kind of aliveness that hums quietly in its sleep. He could hear it now, the steady rhythm of the water moving through the leaves. Shh, shh. It sounded like the world breathing in its sleep. SpongeBob took a slow breath, too, matching it. In and out, in and out. His little chest rose and fell, bubbles escaping in soft spirals. For the first time that day, he didn't feel the need to say anything funny or to make anyone laugh. The silence felt enough full, kind, like the ocean was keeping him company in a quiet way. Above him, a pair of kelp leaves brushed together. The sound was gentle and steady, like fabric in slow motion. He watched the motion of it, hypnotic, the way one leaf bent slightly under the other, how light rippled through the thin green edges. Every movement had meaning, every pause a breath. Tiny shrimp drifted between the stalks, curling up against the stems. One of them yawned, its antennae twitching sleepily. SpongeBob smiled, lowering his voice as if he might wake them. "Good night, little buddies," he whispered. A nearby clam closed its shell with a quiet click. It almost sounded like a response, a polite good night, in its own language. The current deepened, brushing past SpongeBob's arms. He felt it wrap gently around him, carrying with it the faint scent of salt and seagrass. Somewhere far away, a whale's distant hum rippled through the water, low, long, and impossibly gentle. He closed his eyes and just listened. The forest whispered in layers, the kelp sighing, the tiny bubbles fizzing from the sand, the fish turning in their sleep, and the distant song of the sea beyond. SpongeBob thought it was the most peaceful sound in the world, not a sound made by anyone, but a sound that simply was. He drifted lower, resting against a broad kelp leaf that curved like a hammock. It bent slightly under his weight, but didn't let him fall. Beneath him, a small crab peeked from its shell, blinked twice, and decided he wasn't worth worrying about. The crab crawled out a little, carrying a bit of sand on its back. It brushed the sand off carefully, then nestled itself beneath the stem again, vanishing from view. The rhythm of life here was simple, unhurried. Everything in the kelp forest seemed to move according to its own heartbeat. SpongeBob realized he could feel that pulse in the water, gentle and even like the planet itself breathing softly through the waves. He reached out, trailing one gloved hand through the drifting leaves. They were smooth, cool, slightly slippery, like silk soaked in light. When he let go, the leaves kept swaying, as if waving goodbye in slow motion. He chuckled quietly. "You're very polite, you know that?" The kelp swayed again, another wave, slower this time. He decided that counted as a yes. A school of small, silver fish glimmered in the distance, weaving slowly between the stalks like a sleepy constellation. They moved in one smooth motion, turning without sound, their scales catching what little light still lingered. SpongeBob watched until they disappeared behind a cluster of coral. The stillness that followed was thick, heavy, but peaceful. It wasn't empty. It was full of invisible life. Every leaf, every pebble, every grain of sand seemed to hum with a quiet warmth, a reminder that rest was part of the ocean, too. He leaned back against the kelp leaf again, arms folded behind his head. The gentle rocking of the current lulled him deeper into the quiet rhythm. Above, the leaves whispered softly, like the ocean's lullaby, continuing just for him. He whispered back, barely audible, "Shh. Good night, ocean." The forest answered in its language of slow motion and silence, and the night deepened, one quiet heartbeat at a time. SpongeBob drifted deeper into the kelp forest where the light from the ocean above turned soft and far away like stars seen through water. Everything shimmered in slow, fluid motion, each leaf glowing faintly as if it remembered the sun. The deeper he went, the quieter it became. Even the fish here moved slower, as if they too respected the stillness of the hour. A faint trail of sand swirled around SpongeBob's shoes, tracing lazy spirals before settling again. He stopped beside a large stalk of kelp that reached all the way toward the surface. Its trunk was thick and strong, rooted firmly into the sand, but its top vanished into blue darkness. SpongeBob placed his palm against it. The kelp was cool and damp, pulsing faintly with the movement of the current. He could almost feel its heartbeat. "I guess everything breathes in its own way," he murmured. The kelp rustled softly in reply, its leaves brushing each other in long, sighing tones. It was like listening to whispers through a seashell. The rhythm of it wasn't random. It rose and fell, slow and even, matching the tide's pull far above. SpongeBob tilted his head and closed his eyes, letting the sound wash through him. "Shh, shh." The forest spoke, but not in words. It spoke in calm. From somewhere to his left, a faint light moved. Tiny, glowing sea snails were climbing up one of the kelp stalks, leaving a thread of faint blue luminescence in their path. SpongeBob watched them in silence. Each step they took shimmered gently, fading after a few moments. "Looks like someone's making stars," he whispered, with a sleepy smile. He lay back, floating just above the sand. The kelp leaves hung like curtains around him, closing off the outside world. Only the soft hum of the current and the gentle crackle of shifting sand filled the silence. A tiny bubble rose from beneath the sea floor and drifted up, slow as a sigh. SpongeBob watched it rise until it vanished into the darkness. For a moment, he imagined it was carrying a dream up toward the surface, maybe one of his own, or maybe one the ocean was sending back. He reached out, brushing his fingers along a nearby kelp leaf. The surface shimmered faintly like fabric under moonlight. The leaf bent toward him, not resisting, welcoming his touch. It felt alive, not in the way people are alive, but in the way the ocean is ancient, quiet, knowing. "I think you've seen a lot of nights like this," SpongeBob whispered. "Probably more than I could ever count." The kelp leaf waved gently, slow and thoughtful. SpongeBob took that as yes. He let his eyes wander, tracing the shapes in the darkness, the gentle arches of seaweed, the tiny movements of sleeping fish, the swirls of sand where a crab had buried itself. Each piece of the scene felt placed, intentional, like a painter's brushstroke. If he listened closely enough, he could hear patterns, the faint clicking of coral, the muffled pops of distant bubbles, and underneath it all, the deep tone of the sea itself. It was like a great, endless heartbeat that never stopped, only softened when the world grew quiet. He breathed in, slow and steady. The air from his bubble helmet made a faint hiss that sounded almost musical in the silence. He watched it swirl and fade, joining the current. For a moment, SpongeBob imagined the kelp forest as a great underwater cathedral, its tall, waving stalks like pillars, its glowing leaves like stained glass, its quiet hum like a hymn only the ocean could sing. Everywhere he looked, life rested, not gone at all, just breathing slower. Even the creatures that hid in shells or burrowed into sand seemed to listen to the rhythm. A soft current brushed past him again. It carried a few floating petals of sea foam, each one shining faintly. They passed by his face, and for a heartbeat, he thought they were snowflakes. He smiled. He reached out and caught one gently. It dissolved in his hand like light melting into water. "Good night, little flake," he whispered, releasing what wasn't there anymore. The kelp leaves above him rustled again, and the sound seemed to echo through the water like a sigh. It reminded him of a bedtime story, one told by the sea to anyone who would listen. He floated upward a little, rising through the drifting columns of kelp. As he passed, the leaves brushed his sides, not to stop him, but as if to wish him well. The gentle rhythm of the forest followed him like a heartbeat. Everything felt slower now, his movements, his breath, even his thoughts. The world had narrowed to the quiet rustle of leaves and the dim glow of unseen life. And in that deep, dark blue, SpongeBob felt small, but in a comforting way, like being a note in a song that never ends. The kelp forest grew quieter as the night deepened. Even the small sounds, the hum of the current, the crackle of sand shifting, began to fade into something softer. It was the kind of quiet that didn't ask for attention. It just existed, steady and deep. SpongeBob floated in the stillness, feeling it fill every corner of him. The world outside his little bubble of calm could have disappeared, and he might not have noticed. The ocean had become a lullaby, and he was part of its rhythm. He turned slightly, watching as the kelp leaves brushed against one another. The movement reminded him of the curtains in his pineapple house when he left the window open at night. The water carried that same hush, the gentle, half-awake rustling of home. A pair of jellyfish drifted through the darkness. They pulsed slowly, their tentacles trailing behind them like ribbons of light. SpongeBob watched in awe. He didn't move toward them, not this time. He only watched, letting them glide past him like glowing clouds. Their light touched the kelp, turning everything gold for a moment, before fading again. It was like a dream passing through another dream. As they disappeared into the deeper blue, SpongeBob sighed softly. He whispered, "Everything's falling asleep." He looked around and realized it was true. Even the ocean seemed to blink slower. The currents had softened to nothing more than a sigh. The light dimmed further until it became a kind of blue twilight. Somewhere beneath him, a hermit crab tucked itself into its shell. A sea star curled its arms in a lazy spiral. The entire forest was surrendering to rest. He lowered himself back onto a broad kelp leaf lying flat against it. The leaf curved upward, holding him as though it knew he needed somewhere to rest. He folded his arms under his head, gazing upward at the weaving shadows above. The kelp stalks made a gentle lattice that swayed with the water's pulse. Through the gaps, he could see faint streaks of light from the moon reaching down through the sea. They shimmered and bent, never staying still, like soft candlelight under glass. He thought of his friend Patrick, probably snoring loudly in his rock home, Squidward asleep under his blanket with his clarinet leaning nearby, Sandy perhaps dreaming of Texas sunsets, and Gary, little Gary, curled up in his shell, purring softly in the quiet of their house. SpongeBob smiled, a warm, drowsy smile that seemed to float in the water around him. "I hope everyone's sleeping as good as the sea tonight." He let his eyes close. The kelp forest didn't stop its whispers. They only grew quieter, gentler, wrapping around him like words he didn't need to understand. Somewhere far away, a whale's song drifted through the water again. Deep and long, it sounded like the ocean humming itself to sleep. The sound reached the kelp leaves, made them tremble slightly, then settle again. The rhythm of the water matched SpongeBob's breathing now. Every inhale, every exhale soft, even perfectly in tune with the sea. He imagined the kelp forest speaking, not in words, but in feelings. If it could speak, it might say, "Rest now. You've done enough today. The world will wait." He whispered back without opening his eyes, "Okay, just for a little while." A few tiny plankton drifted down from above, landing lightly on his arm like stars that forgot they belonged to the sky. He didn't brush them away. They glowed faintly, pulsing once, twice, and then went still. Time passed, though, in that place. It didn't feel like time at all. It was just stillness, the kind that sits between one dream and another. SpongeBob's breathing grew slower. The kelp leaves swayed slower. Even the faint shimmer of plankton light seemed to dim with him. Somewhere above, a soft wave passed through, stirring the surface light. It reached the forest as a sigh, a reminder that morning would come, but not yet, not for a while. The leaves brushed together once more, whispering to one another. The sound was almost like words, like the sea's version of good night. SpongeBob murmured something in reply, maybe a thank you, maybe nothing at all, and then, gently, peacefully, drifted off to sleep. The forest kept whispering even as he dreamed. It told stories in silence. It sang in stillness. Outside the kelp walls, the sea stretched on forever calm, blue, endless. But within this little patch of forest, the night felt small, safe, and warm. The kelp swayed, the leaves breathed, the ocean hummed. And for a long, quiet while, there was nothing in the world but peace. The water moved slower, thicker, carrying the calm of everything that lived within it. In the distance, glowing jellyfish pulsed faintly soft pinks and blues, hovering like lanterns in a world without gravity. They didn't move with purpose. They drifted. Up, down, sideways, in gentle rhythm. Their tendrils glowed like candle smoke, curling and fading as they floated past. SpongeBob watched them in silence. Each pulse of their bodies matched the slow thump of the ocean's heartbeat, steady, patient. It felt as if the sea itself was trying to sleep, and every creature was a part of that dream. He swam closer, careful not to disturb them. The light from the jellyfish brushed his faceplate, tiny ripples of pink and blue dancing across his cheeks. It was so quiet that he could hear the faint crackle of distant coral, the hum of the current gliding through hollow shells on the ocean floor. For a moment, he imagined the sound was the ocean snoring. He chuckled softly at the thought, though even his laugh came out like a whisper here. The fish around him had settled into their own rhythm. Schools of small silver fish drifted in slow spirals, turning together like leaves caught in a breeze. Their scales reflected bits of moonlight that filtered down from above, making them shimmer like moving constellations. SpongeBob tilted his head, mesmerized. "It's like the sky fell asleep underwater," he murmured. The fish didn't scatter or dart. They only turned lazily, their eyes half closed, tails barely flicking. Every so often, one would brush against another, and they'd both shift direction in a gentle curve. It was a ballet of half-dreaming motion, choreographed by the sea itself. Beneath them, the coral hummed. Not loud, just a faint vibration, deep and low that SpongeBob could feel more than hear. The ocean floor was alive with tiny murmurs, crabs moving inside their shells, sea urchins adjusting their spines, little shrimp making tiny clicks as they nestled into crevices. The sounds blended together into something close to music. If daytime in Bikini Bottom was noisy and full of laughter, then nighttime beneath the kelp was an orchestra of calm. SpongeBob let himself float in the middle of it, arms loose, legs swaying with the current. He felt small again, but in a peaceful way, the kind of small that made the world feel infinite. A jellyfish drifted closer, its glow washing over him like moonlight through water. He could see its heart pulsing faintly, a tiny, perfect rhythm that matched the ocean's pulse. He whispered, "Even you're dreaming, huh?" The jellyfish pulsed once, twice, then slowly floated upward as if answering yes. SpongeBob followed it with his eyes until it vanished into the blue haze above. The light faded, leaving only the dim shimmer of fish and the slow heartbeat of the sea. He wondered what kind of dreams sea creatures had. Did jellyfish dream of glowing brighter? Did crabs dream of bigger shells? Did the coral dream of the sunlight that touched its surface each morning? He smiled softly. Maybe the ocean dreams through them, he thought. The idea lingered in his mind like a lullaby that every flicker, every motion, was just part of something larger resting beneath the stars. He swam forward a bit, through a patch of soft sand where the water grew even stiller. Tiny sand particles glowed faintly as he passed, swirling up in little clouds before falling gently back down. Each grain caught the faintest glint of light, like tiny underwater fireflies. A small sea snail crawled by, leaving a glistening trail across a piece of coral. SpongeBob leaned closer, his voice hushed. "Don't worry, I'll be quiet." The snail didn't respond, of course, just kept inching forward, steady, patient, unbothered by anything else in the world. SpongeBob smiled. "That's okay. You're busy dreaming, too." Above him, the schools of fish slowly drifted apart, their silver glow dissolving into the distance. The jellyfish moved higher, fading into clouds of dim color. The coral hum softened, becoming almost imperceptible. The deeper SpongeBob went, the quieter everything became. The sound of his own breathing filled his helmet, steady and rhythmic. He looked around and realized even though the sea was vast, even though it stretched endlessly, it didn't feel lonely. It felt alive and resting. He thought of how, when he closed up the Krusty Krab at night, everything inside the chairs, the counter, the fryer seemed to exhale once the noise was gone. Maybe the sea was doing that too. Maybe it was just breathing. SpongeBob closed his eyes, floating still, and let the ocean's pulse move through him, a soundless lullaby, older than anything else in the world. SpongeBob floated between two tall columns of kelp, the leaves swaying above him like curtains drawn across a quiet window. The light was dimmer here, a greenish haze, soft and drowsy, the deeper he went. The more it felt like he was entering a place made only for whispers. Tiny bubbles rose from the seafloor, glinting faintly as they drifted upward. Each one carried a faint echo of sound, the sigh of a sleeping shell, the hum of distant coral, the breath of a jellyfish far away. SpongeBob reached out, brushing one of the bubbles with his finger. It wobbled and drifted off again, joining the others in their silent journey toward the surface. He whispered, "Good night, little bubble," and smiled. Below him, a cluster of anemones swayed, their tendrils moving in slow, synchronized waves. Nestled among them were tiny fish, fast asleep, their fins barely twitching as they dreamed. A hermit crab snoozed near the edge, half tucked into its shell, legs dangling lazily out. SpongeBob watched the scene like a bedtime story. Everything had found its own corner of peace. He imagined Patrick lying somewhere in the distance, snoring softly beneath his rock, unaware of the kelp forest's glow. Maybe Gary was curled up in his shell, making little squeaky breaths. And Squidward, he chuckled softly, probably asleep beside his clarinet, pretending not to dream, but doing it anyway. The thought filled him with warmth. Even underwater, where the light never truly went out, there was still such thing as nighttime. A faint shimmer caught his eye, a trail of light, weaving through the kelp like a ribbon. He turned to see a school of moonfish gliding past. Their fins shimmered silver and lavender, and as they passed, the entire water around them seemed to sparkle. They didn't swim fast. They drifted like dream fragments, each one leaving behind a soft trail of luminescence that faded seconds later. SpongeBob followed them with slow, careful strokes. The current carried him alongside them for a while. None of them seemed bothered by his presence. He was just another part of the ocean's hush. He realized something. None of the creatures here were alone. Even in stillness, even in silence, everything shared the same rhythm. The ocean wasn't empty. It was full of resting life. He passed a coral archway shaped like a crescent moon, tiny polyps pulsing faintly into the dim light. Beneath it lay a pair of sleepy seahorses, tails curled around each other. They rocked gently back and forth in the tide, their heads tilting together as if listening to some unseen melody. SpongeBob smiled at the sight, lowering his voice even more. "Sweet dreams, you two." His words dissolved into the water, and the sound came back to him softer, wrapped in the current. He drifted a little farther, his body light, almost weightless. He could feel the temperature shift slightly cooler, more serene. It was the kind of cool that makes you want to wrap up in a blanket and close your eyes. The kelp leaves brushed past him, trailing gently over his arms and legs like soft sea silk. They whispered tiny sounds like sighs. He paused, listening again. Somewhere deeper, he could hear the slow hum of a whale distant. low, comforting. It echoed through the water like a heartbeat, spreading calm to everything it touched. The fish turned slowly toward the sound, as though they too recognized it. Each note of the whale's song rolled through the kelp, across the sand, through SpongeBob's chest, a lullaby made of vibrations. He closed his eyes. For a few seconds he didn't think at all. He just listened. When he opened them again, the jellyfish had returned, a dozen now, floating higher up, like lanterns in an endless blue cathedral. Their light reflected in SpongeBob's eyes, soft and serene. It felt like the ocean was tucking itself in. He thought of how every night he turned off the lights in his pineapple house one by one, the kitchen, the living room, the lamp beside his bed. Maybe the ocean had its own way of turning off its lights, too, dimming the glow, quieting the sounds, slowing every movement until it could rest. And yet, there was still beauty everywhere. Not bright, not loud, but quiet beauty, the kind that lingers when everything else falls asleep. SpongeBob floated near a tall kelp stalk and let himself settle there, watching the ripples of light dance across the seafloor. His mind wandered gently, unfocused, the way it does when you're about to drift off. He thought of tomorrow. Maybe the Krusty Krab would be busy, or maybe he'd spend the morning with Patrick, blowing bubbles. But that was tomorrow. Right now, the sea was asleep, and in its sleep, it carried him too. He smiled faintly, whispering into the water, "Good night, ocean." The words drifted upward, soft and slow, until they dissolved into the stillness above, joining the faint hum of coral, the slow dance of jellyfish, and the heartbeat of the sleeping sea. Far above the kelp tops, soft currents rolled in from the open sea, carrying silver flecks of plankton that shimmered like drifting stars. The glow pulsed slowly here, then gone, and the forest breathed in time with the waves. SpongeBob drifted upward a little, following the light. His movements were unhurried, as if even swimming too quickly might wake something ancient and dreaming. Every motion left a trail of tiny bubbles that rose and disappeared without sound. He could see now that the whole kelp forest was alive and rest, a kind of stillness that wasn't emptiness, but fullness in quiet form. A small sea snail crept across a smooth rock, its shell faintly glowing from trapped luminescence. It left a soft spiral trail behind it, curling like a signature of peace. SpongeBob bent down to watch it pass. The snail's eyes blinked drowsily, as though even the act of moving required a yawn. "Good night, little one," he whispered again. From a nearby cave, a sleepy pufferfish floated out, inflated halfway, looking lost between dreams. It hovered for a moment before gently sinking back toward the sand, settling like a balloon on a pillow. SpongeBob chuckled quietly, even in sleep. Life here had its funny shapes. A few steps farther, he noticed the ocean floor dip slightly into a clearing, a kind of meadow where tall grass-like kelp swayed in every direction. The ground sparkled faintly, as if the sand had captured starlight. He hovered above it, letting the motion rock him softly. It reminded him of nights back in Bikini Bottom when he'd lie on his bed, listening to the slow ticking of his alarm clock. Except here, the ticking was replaced by the steady pulse of the sea, the rise and fall of invisible tides, the faraway creak of coral branches, the faint click of shells settling. He realized how connected it all was, how every shell, every fish, every flicker of light played its part in the ocean's nightly song. A gentle shadow drifted overhead. SpongeBob looked up to see a giant manta ray gliding past, wings outstretched like a dark blanket moving across the stars. Its motion stirred the water slightly, sending the ripples of moonlight through the kelp. For a moment, SpongeBob felt like he was inside a dream. Someone else was having a dream made of light and silence and slow, endless movement. He floated with the manta's current, arms spread slightly, eyes half closed. He didn't need to do anything. He didn't need to go anywhere. Just float. Just listen. Nearby, two jellyfish bumped gently into each other, their tendrils glowing pink for a moment, before dimming again. SpongeBob smiled at them, remembering all the afternoons he and Patrick had spent jellyfishing, laughing until their cheeks hurt. But now, even those jellyfish were quiet, soft balloons drifting between sighs. He turned his gaze downward. The seafloor was dotted with sleeping shells, clams slightly open, starfish pressed into the sand, each one resting in its own rhythm. A sea cucumber twitched and rolled, its body folding like a soft blanket. It was a strange kind of comfort seeing so many lives simply resting. SpongeBob's voice was no more than a murmur when he said, "I think the ocean dreams too." And perhaps it did. Maybe it dreamed of the days when sunlight reached every grain of sand, when laughter rippled through its waves. Or maybe it dreamed of nothing at all, just peace, stillness, quiet breath. The kelp forest swayed once more, and SpongeBob felt the current, pulling him slightly upward. His eyes followed a line of glowing sea dust, drifting toward the surface like fireflies in slow motion. He followed it with his gaze until the light blurred softly into a faint shimmer far above. That was the surface, the border between waking and sleeping, light and dark. He stayed beneath it, perfectly content to let it stay just out of reach. He thought of home again, of the clock ticking, of Gary's faint snore, of the way his bed creaked when he turned over. Maybe in some strange way, the ocean's rhythm and his own were the same, both steady, both eternal. He whispered to the sea, "Good night, everyone," and the current seemed to carry his voice outward past the jellyfish, the kelp, and the sleeping coral, until it disappeared into the dark. The whale's low hum returned, softer now, like a lullaby's final verse. SpongeBob's eyelids drooped. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt gently, not spinning, but swaying like a cradle made of water. He let himself drift down again, finding a small hollow between two kelp roots. The sand there was cool and smooth. He tucked his hands beneath his chin and closed his eyes. The forest continued its gentle motion, the jellyfish swaying, the fish dreaming, the current humming, and somewhere deep in the ocean, a light blinked once more before fading completely. Night had claimed every ripple. And within it, SpongeBob slept smiling softly, surrounded by the calmest silence the sea could make. Somewhere deep within the kelp forest, where even moonlight grows shy, SpongeBob drifted past a curtain of leaves that brushed softly against his shoulders. The water there felt different, thicker, slower, as if holding its breath. He paused. The sea was quiet, but not empty. There was a faint shimmer just ahead, hidden between two tall columns of kelp that swayed like sleepy sentinels. The light was thin, golden, almost shy, like a secret waiting to be remembered. SpongeBob tilted his head, the corners of his mouth curling into a curious smile. "What's this?" he whispered, though no one was there to hear him. His voice dissolved into tiny bubbles that floated away like thoughts half-formed. He swam closer. The glow became clearer, revealing a narrow trail winding deeper into the forest, a path made not of sand or coral, but of light itself. It pulsed faintly beneath him, tracing the ground in spirals and curls like writing in a forgotten language. SpongeBob hovered above it, mesmerized. The light didn't flicker the way jellyfish did, nor did it feel electric like the neon reefs. This was something older, something that felt alive in a quieter way. He reached out one hand, brushing the trail with his fingers. A soft warmth bloomed in his palm. The current shifted. Somewhere far away, he thought he heard a sound, a gentle hum, low and round, like the ocean's memory stirring. He followed the light. Each movement forward was like stepping deeper into a dream. The kelp around him grew taller, thicker, their edges glowing faintly in reflection. The forest no longer felt like a place. It felt like a memory. As he moved, flashes of imagery passed him by, faint as mist. A crab scurrying through this very path long ago. A jellyfish drifting slowly over glowing sand. A small, ancient shell buried in the corner, whispering to the tide. SpongeBob's eyes softened. "It's like the ocean remembers everything," he said quietly. He looked down again. The golden trail curved gently through the kelp, spiraling toward the heart of the forest. The deeper he went, the calmer the water became, until even his own bubbles seemed hesitant to rise. It was the kind of peace that felt sacred, not silence, but harmony. SpongeBob began to hum softly, the tune blending with the distant sound of the currents. The melody echoed faintly, bouncing between the kelp leaves like the voice of someone singing in their sleep. It reminded him of lullabies, the ones his grandma used to hum when he was a little sponge drifting off after a long day. He smiled, letting the memory linger. The golden trail pulsed brighter as if reacting to the song. SpongeBob's curiosity deepened. "Are you listening?" he asked the path, half laughing. The bubbles that escaped his mouth danced upward, catching fragments of the glowing light before fading away. The forest answered in its own way. A soft drift of sand lifted from the ground, swirling gently around him like snow underwater. It didn't feel cold or heavy, just timeless. He floated through it, watching the grains glitter in the dim light. Each one looked like it contained a world small, shining memories of everything that had ever touched the sea. A quiet voice inside him said that this place wasn't new, that maybe long ago he'd passed here before in a dream, in a thought, or maybe in another version of himself that only existed when the ocean slept. SpongeBob didn't question it. He simply followed the light as it wound forward, slow and sure, glowing like the edge of a thought that refused to fade. After a while, the kelp thinned, and the forest opened into a small clearing. The water here was warmer, tinted in gold and green. The ground beneath him was smooth, the sand undisturbed. At the center of the clearing stood an old coral archway, cracked with age but still radiant. The same golden light ran through its edges, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. SpongeBob floated before it, eyes wide with awe. He could feel the warmth radiating softly, filling the space with a sense of quiet reverence. It wasn't scary, it was beautiful, in the way forgotten things are beautiful. The hum returned faint, melodic and slow, like the ocean sighing in its sleep. SpongeBob closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. For a moment he felt weightless, not just in body, but in thought. The trail of light reached the archway, then vanished beneath it. He hovered there for a moment longer, torn between curiosity and calm. Whatever waited beyond, he felt no rush to find it. The ocean was in no hurry, and neither was he. The kelp above him swayed gently, their shadows brushing across his face like soft hands. SpongeBob smiled. "Maybe I'll just rest here for a bit," he whispered. And as the last of the light shimmered across the clearing, the ocean seemed to nod in agreement. SpongeBob took a deep breath. Though in the water, it felt more like a gentle pause. His eyes traced the golden edges of the coral arch. The light there was alive but soft, never harsh, as though it knew it didn't need to shout to be seen. He floated closer, and as he passed beneath it, something subtle changed. The water thickened slightly, a shimmer running over his body like a warm ripple. For a heartbeat, he thought he heard a sound not from outside but within him, a faint bell-like tone that pulsed once, then faded. The light trail continued ahead, narrower now, winding through clusters of seagrass and coral stones shaped like spirals. The glow shifted from gold to a paler hue, somewhere between pearl and moonlight. It lit the path just enough for him to see no more. He realized he'd lost track of how long he'd been swimming. Time didn't seem to exist here, or if it did, it wasn't counting in the same way. Each movement felt suspended, like a note held too long in a gentle song. Around him, the kelp leaned closer. The fronds brushed against his sides as if greeting him, their edges glinting faintly. He reached out to touch one. It was soft and cool, and when he did, a tiny spark of light raced along the leaf's surface. It was beautiful. Everything here seemed to exist in a quiet balance, neither asleep nor awake, simply being. SpongeBob looked ahead again. The path curved upward, leading toward a dim glow that seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. He followed, letting the rhythm guide him. The water around him thickened into misty layers of light. It didn't feel heavy, more like he was swimming through a dream that had forgotten it wasn't real. Soon the trail opened into a wide clearing, larger than any part of the forest he'd seen before. The walls of kelp framed it like cathedral columns, stretching upward into endless blue shadow. In the center floated a massive stone, half buried in sand and covered in thin strands of coral moss. The golden trail led straight to it. SpongeBob approached slowly. He felt the faint hum again, vibrating through the water and into his chest. It wasn't a voice, exactly more like a feeling that could almost be understood if you stayed still enough. He placed one hand on the stone's surface. It was warm, alive with a subtle pulse. As his fingers made contact, the golden light flared briefly and spread across the stone, tracing ancient lines and patterns that looked like waves, spirals, and tiny starbursts. Each line shimmered faintly, revealing scenes that flickered in and out, memories, maybe, of the ocean itself. He saw images that weren't his, a whale gliding through an empty sea, coral blooming across a ridge, the first jellyfish lighting up the dark. The visions were brief, soft, almost hesitant, but they filled him with a strange comfort. It was as if the sea was showing him its dreams, the parts of itself it kept quiet during the day. SpongeBob's eyes softened. "You remember everything, don't you?" he whispered. "Even when we forget." The hum deepened slightly in response. The sand at his feet stirred, and a current brushed gently across his face like a sigh. For a long time he simply stood there, feeling the ocean breathe around him. Then the golden path began to fade, dimming slowly until only the faintest glimmer remained. SpongeBob took a step back. The water here was calmer than ever, the silence deep enough to hear his own heartbeat. He closed his eyes, and in that stillness, memories of his own began to surface. The Krusty Krab at sunset, Patrick's laughter echoing across jellyfish fields, the warmth of his pineapple home when the ocean outside turned cold. Each memory floated up gently, glowing faintly before dissolving into the same soft gold that surrounded him. He realized then that this path wasn't just something the ocean remembered. It was something that helped him remember, too. Not with words or pictures, but with stillness. He smiled. "Thank you," he said softly, as though speaking to the sea itself. For a moment, everything glowed brighter, the kelp, the coral, even the drifting sand. It was as if the forest was nodding back. SpongeBob lingered, not wanting to leave, but the trail ahead, faint though it was, still glowed just enough to invite him onward. He turned, taking one last look at the luminous stone, and then began to swim again, following the last stretch of the hidden path. The water ahead shimmered softly, bending the light into ribbons. It felt like moving toward the heart of something vast and kind. The deeper he went, the more the golden light mixed with pale blues and greens, the colors of dawn trying to find their way underwater. He knew somehow that this path would lead him back, not to where he started, but to where he needed to be when morning came. The kelp parted gently ahead of him, and the golden glow began to thin, merging with the cool blue of the open sea. SpongeBob stopped, turning once more to look behind him. The trail was fading now, dissolving into the quiet water, as though it had only ever existed for him to see. He smiled, whispering one last time, "Good night, hidden path." And with that, he drifted forward into the soft light, waiting at the edge of the forest, where the sea and its dreams met. The water ahead opened wide, vast and slow, like a curtain parting to reveal the quiet heart of the ocean. SpongeBob glided through it gently, his movements small and weightless. The light that once marked the path behind him now shimmered faintly in a distance, fading into tiny flecks like drifting dust. The kelp here was shorter, softer. The fronds curled at their tips, swaying not from any strong current, but from the rhythm of the sea's own breath. The silence carried weight not heavy, but whole, like the pause before the world exhales. SpongeBob stopped in the middle of it all. Above him, the ceiling of the ocean stretched wide and dark, painted with faint strokes of blue-green light. It looked like an endless sky turned upside down, the stars replaced by tiny glowing creatures, each one pulsing at its own sleepy rhythm. He turned slowly in the water, taking it in. It didn't feel lonely here. It felt infinite. Something about the place made him feel small in the right way, not forgotten, but part of something too big to ever be alone in. As he drifted, a faint hum returned deeper this time, more like the echo of a lullaby remembered by the sea. It wasn't coming from the coral or the kelp anymore. It was everywhere. The whole ocean was singing softly, in tones too low for the surface to ever hear. SpongeBob let the sound wrap around him. It reminded him of everything he loved of home, of laughter, of every quiet night he'd spent gazing out of his window, watching bubbles rise toward the dark above. It felt like all of that existed here, too hidden inside this endless calm. The golden shimmer appeared again, faint but certain, swirling in front of him like a trail of dust caught in sunlight. It twisted once, then began to circle around him slowly. He reached out his hand, and it wrapped gently around his fingers as if greeting him. The light didn't burn or sparkle, it just existed, patient and peaceful. When SpongeBob moved his hand, the glow followed, tracing delicate shapes in the water, circles, spirals, ripples. They faded just as quickly as they formed. He began to understand the path wasn't just something to follow. It was something the ocean wanted to share, something that showed itself only when someone was quiet enough to listen. He closed his eyes, floating in place, letting his body rise and fall with the water's movement. In that stillness, thoughts drifted in and out like slow-moving clouds. He thought of the Krusty Krab's hum when it closed at night, the sound of his spatula clinking against the grill, Patrick's sleepy voice saying goodnight through his rock. Gary's soft meow echoing down the hallway. He realized all those sounds, those moments, were their own kind of hidden path, trails of memory that led back to peace. The golden light pulsed brighter once, then slowly began to expand outward, forming thin ribbons that floated through the water like breath made visible. They curved around the kelp, touched the sand, and shimmered up toward the surface. For a brief, beautiful moment, the entire forest seemed alive again. Not awake, but aware. Every leaf and stone glowed with that same warm light, as if remembering who they were and how long they had been loved by the sea. SpongeBob's eyes widened softly. "It's like the ocean's dreaming," he whispered. He wasn't sure why, but the words felt right. The glow pulsed once more, softer this time, as though acknowledging his thought. Then it began to fade slowly, deliberately, like a candle dimming in gentle wind. As the last ribbons of light disappeared, SpongeBob felt a deep calm settle over him. It wasn't sadness, and it wasn't loss, it was gratitude. The ocean didn't need to speak. It had shown him something older than words, the beauty of being still, of existing in the in-between, of knowing that even when things fade, their warmth remains. He smiled softly, hands resting against the current. A soft motion caught his attention. Out of the dark above, a jellyfish drifted down, glowing faint pink. It circled him once, its tendrils brushing gently against his shoulder, leaving behind a faint shimmer. Mooley chuckled. "Hey there, friend." The jellyfish pulsed once, slow and calm, then drifted onward, following the faint trace of golden light that still shimmered faintly ahead. SpongeBob followed, not because he needed to know where it led, but because the motion felt right, steady, peaceful, guided. As he swam, the current grew lighter. The darkness began to lift, and the faintest hint of pale blue started to appear ahead, spreading softly through the water like dawn breaking beneath the waves. He could feel it, the world above stirring, the day beginning to find its way into the deep. But here, in the last stretch of the hidden path, there was no rush, just the slow, eternal rhythm of the sea remembering itself. SpongeBob smiled and whispered, "I'll see you again." The kelp swayed one last time, as if to say goodbye. And then the final glow faded, leaving only the faint shimmer of sunlight beginning to seep through the water. He floated there for a long time, eyes half closed, letting the light touch his face. There was no need for sound. The ocean's silence said enough. As SpongeBob floated nearer to the edge of the kelp forest, the golden traces around him continued to fade until only a single thread of light remained. It swayed lazily in the current, like the last note of a song holding on to silence. He followed it quietly, his movements slow, his heart steady. The water grew lighter by degrees, each layer brighter than the one before. The deep green of the forest began to melt into pale blue. Behind him, the kelp whispered their final lullaby, the soft sound of leaves brushing against one another in the slow rhythm of the sea. It felt like they were saying goodbye, not with words, but with peace. He looked back once more. The hidden trail he'd followed had vanished completely now. In its place was only stillness, and the faint shimmer of bubbles rising toward the surface. The forest, once mysterious and shadowed, now seemed to rest every frond and branch gently glowing in the first light of morning. SpongeBob took a deep breath, though he didn't need to. It was more a gesture, a way to hold the moment inside him for just a little longer. As he turned forward again, he saw the faint glow of sunlight breaking through the water. The surface rippled far above him, golden and soft. The glow fell like silk through the ocean, touching his hands, his face, the tips of his square pants. For a moment, he stopped moving altogether, just watching the light dance around him. It flickered and shimmered, shifting like the ocean's own heartbeat. He whispered, "Morning's here." The sound barely escaped his lips, yet the water carried it far, blending it into the hum of the sea. It felt as though the entire forest had heard him. The jellyfish from before appeared again, drifting down lazily through the golden current. 2 more followed, then 3, all glowing faint pink and pale yellow. They pulsed gently, forming a quiet procession, as if guiding him toward the light. SpongeBob smiled. Thanks for showing me the way." The jellyfish moved ahead, and he followed, their soft glow leading him through the last curtain of kelp. As he emerged from the forest, he found himself in open water again, vast, clear, endless. The ocean stretched in every direction, its surface glittering with dawn. He could see the reflection of the sun rippling like a living thing, spreading warmth through the cold blue. He felt small again, but peaceful. For a while he floated just beneath the surface, eyes turned upward. The sunlight broke into thousands of beams that filtered down, dancing across his skin like laughter. He reached up and let the rays slip between his fingers. The golden light he had followed through the hidden path was gone now, but he could still feel it, not around him, but within him. The same calm, the same warmth, the same quiet promise that the ocean would always hold its secrets gently. He thought about everything he'd seen the glowing kelp, the sleeping sea creatures, the endless quiet hum that filled the deep. He realized that not all mysteries were meant to be solved. Some were meant to be felt like dreams that stay with you long after you wake. A small fish darted past his leg, then another. The world was beginning to stir again. The deep stillness of night was giving way to the soft rhythm of morning. He could hear distant sounds, the muted rumble of waves rolling over coral, the faint creak of a shell shifting, the gentle flutter of fins. The sea was waking up. SpongeBob smiled. "Good morning, ocean." The current caught his voice and carried it forward, scattering it like bubbles. He watched them rise and vanish one by one. Above him, the surface shimmered. He began to swim upward, slow and light, his arms moving in gentle strokes. With each motion, he felt the pull of the day ahead, not demanding, not loud, but steady. As he reached the shallows near the reef, the world turned golden around him. The water here was clearer, the sand white and soft beneath. Coral glistened like tiny suns. He looked back once the forest, now a shadow in the distance, sleeping peacefully beneath the waves. The hidden path was gone from sight, but he knew it would always be there, waiting quietly for the next time he needed to remember how to be still. He smiled again softly. Then he turned toward home. The surface broke above him, light bursting through like laughter. The waves sparkled. The air was warm. SpongeBob blinked as sunlight touched his face, feeling the salt on his cheeks and the cool breeze rolling over the sea. Far in the distance, the faint outline of Bikini Bottom shimmered his pineapple house, small but bright against the horizon. He floated there for a long time between the world above and the one below, feeling both perfectly balanced. The ocean behind him whispered with every small wave. The light ahead promised another day. SpongeBob whispered one last time, "Thank you, ocean." Then he smiled a simple, quiet smile and began to swim toward home as the morning light followed him, gently across the waves. The ocean was quieter here, a clearing in the endless kelp, where the seafloor spread wide and gentle, like a bed made for dreaming. The water was softer, too, the kind that carried no chill, no rush, only the slow cradle of a current that moved like a lullaby. SpongeBob drifted down slowly, turning once in the golden water before his feet met the sand. Beneath him, tiny grains shimmered like stars. They rose and swirled with every small motion, settling again in lazy spirals. He looked around, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was nothing but open space. No shelves, no aisles, no glowing paths, only the quiet pulse of the ocean. Above him, bubbles drifted upward, catching the faintest light as they climbed. They looked like small lanterns floating toward the surface, carrying bits of dreams with them. SpongeBob smiled, his eyes half-lidded. "This feels nice," he whispered, the sound barely forming words in the still water. He sank to his knees, feeling the cool softness of the sand. It gave slightly under his weight, the way a bed does when it welcomes you home. Around him, sea dust shimmered, forming little rings of light that drifted apart. He leaned back, letting the water support him completely. His arms spread slightly. His hat floated away, tumbling in slow circles until it disappeared into the haze above. He didn't go after it. He just watched it go the same way someone might watch a cloud drift out of sight. The bubbles rose again, catching light in their curves. He began to count them without meaning to 1, 2, 3, 4, until the numbers dissolved and became nothing but rhythm. Each breath slow, each thought lighter, each sound distant but kind. He closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he could still feel the sea moving. It brushed against his face, his arms, the edges of his square sleeves. The touch was constant but never insistent. The ocean knew how to be gentle. And slowly his mind began to drift. He thought of jellyfish fields glowing under the night sky. He thought of Patrick snoring softly beside him on a camping night under the stars. He thought of Gary's quiet meow echoing from another room, faint, sleepy, familiar. Each thought rose like a bubble, floating away one by one. When he opened his eyes again, the world had shifted slightly. The clearing seemed wider, the water darker yet warmer. Tiny fish drifted past, glowing softly, their bodies pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. He wasn't sure if he was awake or dreaming, and it didn't seem to matter. The sand below glowed faintly now, faint blue ripples dancing like moonlight on the floor. SpongeBob reached out a hand and brushed it. The sand scattered, glowing brighter for a moment, then dimming again. His hand lingered. The glow traced the outline of his fingers before fading. He laughed softly. The sound didn't go far, but the bubbles carried it upward, spinning it into tiny rings that shimmered and broke apart. A soft hum filled the clearing, low and even, like the sound of a shell held close to the ear. The kind of sound that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. He listened. It wasn't music, not exactly. More like the ocean remembering a melody it once knew. He closed his eyes again. The hum deepened. His body grew lighter. The sand beneath him became cloud-soft. The water above him turned velvety and slow. He floated upward, though he hadn't moved at all. In that in-between space, not quite awake, not quite asleep, SpongeBob's thoughts became shapes. Not sharp, not clear, but soft and warm like memories seen through morning fog. He saw the Krusty Krab bathed in golden light, empty and peaceful. He saw his pineapple house resting under the moon, windows glowing faintly. He saw the kelp forest again, its hidden path, shining dimly beneath the surface. And through all of it, he felt the same thing. Stillness. The kind of stillness that lives beneath sound, that quiet pulse of the world when everything is right where it belongs. He smiled, his body completely weightless now, arms floating gently beside him. A single bubble rose from his chest, carrying the last trace of his waking breath. It drifted upward, slow and calm, until it disappeared into the endless shimmer above. SpongeBob sighed softly, not in sadness, but in release. And for a while there was nothing but the hum of the deep, the shimmer of sand, and the soft rhythm of a heart learning how to rest. The dream deepened. The water around SpongeBob no longer felt like the sea. It felt like air, like breath, something alive that moved with him. He floated, eyes half open now, watching the soft shimmer of color drift in ribbons through the current. A gentle violet hue rolled over the clearing, then gold, then blue again. Slow waves of color passing as though time itself were breathing in shades. Ooh, he could no longer tell where light came from. It just was, soft and constant, like peace had found its form and color. SpongeBob stretched out one arm. The water glowed faintly beneath his fingertips. Each tiny motion left behind ripples of light, like painting across liquid glass. The ocean around him hummed again, that same low, comforting resonance. It wasn't a sound he could hear with his ears anymore, but one that seemed to move through his chest, his thoughts, his memories. The hum became warmth, and the warmth became memory. He saw himself and Patrick lying on a rock under the stars, laughing at nothing at all. The laughter echoed softly, but not as sound as feeling, the kind that lingers longer than words. He drifted through that moment like it was real. He reached out for it, and the memory shimmered, turning to bubbles that floated upward and vanished into the dark. Then another image formed Squidward sitting by his window late at night, his clarinet notes echoing faintly through the water. The notes spiraled upward, twirling around SpongeBob in glowing ribbons. He followed them, eyes closed, humming softly to their rhythm. The ocean carried him along gently, lovingly, through fragments of the world he knew. His home, his friends. The Krusty Krab, its sign flickering like a star in the distance. Each one appeared only long enough to make him smile. Then, like bubbles, they rose away into the deep, leaving only calm. He didn't chase them. He simply watched, feeling each one dissolve into peace. Then, without warning, the hum shifted. The low tone deepened into something slower heartbeat rhythm echoing through the water. The sand below began to pulse in soft light, glowing with each beat. SpongeBob felt it through his whole body, as if the ocean itself were breathing him. He inhaled gently. The light brightened. He exhaled. The glow dimmed. For a long time, he just breathed with the sea. In, out, together. His body felt lighter, dissolving into the same rhythm. His thoughts faded into the pulse. There was no SpongeBob here. No shape or sound. Just presence. From somewhere above, a faint light poured down. It wasn't bright, more like the glow of dawn seen through sleep. The kind of light that warms but doesn't wake. It pooled across his face, across the sand, across the forest beyond. In the far distance, he could see the outlines of the kelp again, tall and still, their leaves moving just enough to remind him that time was still flowing. The glow along their edges flickered like candlelight underwater. SpongeBob turned his head toward them. The kelp swayed slightly as if waving back. He smiled again, a small, tired smile that felt like home. And then, from the shadows between the strands, a school of glowing fish passed through. They moved together in slow formation, forming a spiral before scattering into the open water. Their bodies left trails of silver light that twinkled long after they were gone. SpongeBob reached a hand toward their path, tracing the spiral they had left behind. As he did, the light in the clearing responded small motes rising like fireflies, surrounding him in a slow, swirling dance. They circled him once, twice, 3 times, then began to drift upward, carrying the dream higher until it felt as if the entire ocean had turned into a slow-moving galaxy. He lay back completely now, letting the lights drift above. His reflection shimmered faintly in the glowing sand, eyes closed, hands folded over his chest, a faint smile still lingering. Around him, everything pulsed in rhythm. Kelp, the fish, the sand, even the light itself. It all breathed together, one slow, steady motion. In that moment, SpongeBob realized the ocean never truly sleeps. It only changes its rhythm. And he, too, was part of that rhythm, another note in the endless underwater song. He exhaled once more. The bubbles rose softly from his lips, spinning as they climbed, their reflections flickering across the clearing. They vanished at the edge of the light, merging with the soft hum that filled everything. The dream felt infinite now, and for once, SpongeBob didn't need to wake. The dream carried SpongeBob deeper, though he didn't swim or move. The ocean seemed to glide around him, like a tide that had decided to do all the drifting for him. He was simply being, floating, breathing, dreaming. The water turned brighter, a slow bloom of gold and turquoise spreading through the deep. The glow wasn't coming from above now. It came from within the water itself, as though the sea had found a way to shine from the inside out. SpongeBob's eyes opened slightly. The world around him shimmered soft ripples of color, twisting into spirals. Each wave moved like thought, like memory taking shape before dissolving again. He looked down. The sand beneath him had become transparent, glowing faintly. Beneath that glow, he could see layers of light, ancient ripples of motion, the ocean's slow heartbeat carried through time. He reached out again. His fingers brushed the water, and where he touched, the glow brightened, forming little bursts of warmth that moved outward like ripples of laughter. SpongeBob laughed too softly, and his laughter became bubbles, and the bubbles became light. The ocean responded, sending a faint echo of laughter back. It didn't sound like an echo, though. It sounded like an answer. He closed his eyes again, listening. There it was, that faint, familiar hum, still there, still singing through the water. But now he could hear other tones in it, higher ones, delicate and shimmering, like the chime of glass, and lower ones, deep and slow, like the thrum of coral beds under waves. The whole sea was singing quietly, endlessly. He began to realize maybe the ocean wasn't just around him. Maybe it was him. Maybe every creature, every bubble, every grain of sand carried the same quiet rhythm. The realization wasn't loud or sudden, was soft, like remembering a dream you'd once known by heart. He let that thought drift. He didn't hold it or question it. He just floated within it, within that pulse of belonging. The colors above him shifted again. The water dimmed slightly, and new shapes appeared in the distance, faint outlines glowing in blue light. They looked like sea anemones, but taller, swaying in slow motion. Between them drifted jellyfish, their tendrils glowing like ribbons of soft silver. As they passed, SpongeBob felt their presence. Not touch, exactly more like warmth passing through him. Each one seemed to leave behind a small glimmer of light, as though greeting him in silence. The current changed slightly, brushing his side, urging him onward. And so, without thinking, he followed. The dream path curved gently. The kelp returned tall and graceful, their leaves lined with tiny lights that flickered like lanterns in the dark. It wasn't the same path as before. This one seemed to lead inward, not forward, as if the ocean were guiding him to its quietest place. The deeper he drifted, the slower the light pulsed. One beat every few seconds, each beat matching his breath. In that slow rhythm, images formed and faded in the water around him. Not scenes, but feelings turned into shapes. He saw a soft outline of Patrick's face, smiling faintly, fading into ripples. He saw the shadow of his pineapple home, turning in the glow, peaceful and still. He saw the Krusty Krab not as a busy restaurant, but as a quiet space bathed in early morning gold, chairs neatly stacked, the smell of salt and warmth lingering in the air. Each image passed like a wave. And with each wave, SpongeBob felt lighter, emptier, but in a way that felt like peace, not loss. He drifted until he reached the heart of the glow, a circular space surrounded by tall kelp, glowing softly from within. It looked alive, breathing, and he realized it was. This was where the ocean's hum came from. He hovered at its center, arms gently floating beside him, eyes half closed. The hum deepened, washing through him like a slow tide. It vibrated in his chest, in his thoughts, even in the small space where dreams hide between waking and sleep. He let it fill him completely, no fear, no noise, no rush. Just the steady rhythm of the deep. And then, for a moment, everything stopped. No sound, no motion. Just stillness, the kind of stillness that feels eternal, the pause between heartbeats, the quiet before dawn. Then softly, the hum began again, this time warmer, brighter. A single beam of golden light fell from above, wrapping him in its glow. He didn't move. He didn't need to. The light felt like understanding, gentle, wordless, complete. He smiled one last time before closing his eyes, and in that golden quiet, he whispered softly to no one at all, "Thank you." The words drifted upward, dissolving into the glow. The ocean answered with a single pulse of light, slow, calm, infinite. And then, all was still again. The light around SpongeBob softened again, turning from gold to the faint blue of early morning. He could feel the ocean shifting, not waking exactly, but stirring like a long exhale after a night of rest. He floated still, his body almost motionless, surrounded by soft ribbons of light. The kelp swayed slower now, their luminous edges dimming. The hum that filled the clearing grew quieter, more delicate, until it was little more than a memory of sound. SpongeBob opened his eyes. The golden beam that had surrounded him was fading, dissolving into streams of warmth that flowed back into the sea. He reached out to touch one, and it brushed his fingertips, warm, soft, alive before fading into tiny, drifting bubbles. Those bubbles began to rise toward the surface, carrying the last light of the dream with them. SpongeBob watched them go, his expression peaceful. He didn't try to follow, he only smiled, knowing that wherever they went, they carried a piece of this quiet with them. The current moved gently beneath him, lifting his body higher, turning him slowly in the calm water. Far above, he could see faint shafts of pale light beginning to pierce through the deep, the first signs of morning. The ocean around him began to wake. The kelp stirred again, their tips glowing faintly as they reached toward the light. A gentle drift of sand lifted from the sea floor, curling upward like mist. Tiny fish darted from their resting places, their scales flashing once before vanishing into the blue. The hum that had carried him all night now turned into a softer tone, less like song, more like a sigh. A farewell whispered by the deep. He closed his eyes again, feeling the water cradle him one last time. His body was weightless, his mind completely still. Somewhere far away, he could almost hear the sound of a seagull calling, faint and distant. A sign that morning was near. The golden light spread wider. It brushed across the kelp, across the sand, across SpongeBob's face. He blinked slowly, half awake, half dreaming. The glowing forest began to fade around him, the light melting into the same gentle haze that had always separated dreams from morning. He took one final look at the clearing, at the soft glow of the sand, the slow dance of bubbles, the quiet breath of the sea. And then softly he whispered, "I'll see you again." The words rippled outward in golden waves before fading completely. Then everything brightened. The world around him dissolved into warm light, white, gold, and blue, until he could no longer see where the water ended and the light began. There was no sense of up or down anymore, no boundary between sea and sky. Just peace. And slowly the scene changed. The kelp forest became a faint reflection, replaced by the gentle curve of the ocean's surface. The bubbles that had once carried his dreams broke softly in the morning light, and SpongeBob drifted upward, his form now outlined by sunbeams filtering through the water. He didn't wake with a jolt, he simply arrived back in himself, his body resting comfortably in bed, the gentle sway of his pineapple home around him. The sound of the sea outside was the same hum he'd heard in the dream, just quieter, simpler. Gary purred softly from beside him. The faint smell of salt drifted through his window, carried by the morning breeze. SpongeBob blinked his eyes open and smiled. For a moment he didn't move. He just lay there, letting the last traces of the dream settle into his chest. There was no rush, no alarm, no noise, only the gentle feeling of peace. He looked toward his bedside table, where a single seashell sat smooth, pearly, ordinary. He picked it up and held it against his chest, smiling faintly. The shell felt warm. He didn't know why, only that it made him think of the dream, of the kelp forest, the glowing light, and the hum of the deep. He whispered, "Good morning, ocean," and placed the shell back down. Outside his window, the sunlight poured through the water above, breaking into 1,000 ripples that danced across his walls. The day had begun, but quietly, kindly, the way all good dreams end. SpongeBob stood, stretched, and looked out toward the sea. Somewhere beyond the horizon, he imagined the kelp forest still swaying, still glowing softly under the touch of the morning light. And for just a second he thought he heard it again, that faint hum, that rhythm of the deep. It wasn't loud, it wasn't even real, maybe, but it was there like the memory of peace that never quite leaves you. He smiled again softly. Then, humming a tune he couldn't quite remember, SpongeBob stepped outside, ready for a new day, carrying the calm of the ocean in his heart. The world around him grew brighter with each passing minute. Sunbeams touched the edges of the kelp forest, tracing soft lines of light across the ocean floor. It was like someone had opened the curtains of the sea, not suddenly, but tenderly, letting the morning in little by little. Tiny shrimp peeked from their burrows. A sleepy crab stretched its claws and blinked as if squinting against the light. Even the coral began to shine more clearly now. Pinks, yellows, and pale violets glimmered beneath a moving veil of gold. SpongeBob floated past a cluster of sea anemones, swaying in the current. They looked like flowers waking up, opening their arms to greet the light. A small smile curved across his face. He couldn't help but think how peaceful it all was, how gentle the world could be when it wasn't rushing. He drifted closer to one of the tall kelp stalks and placed a hand on it. The surface was smooth and cool beneath his fingers. It pulsed slightly, alive with the slow rhythm of the sea. The kelp swayed with him, brushing softly against his arm as if to say goodbye. SpongeBob whispered, "I'll come back soon." The kelp leaves rustled in reply. He let go, spinning slowly as the current moved him along. The deeper he drifted toward the edge of the forest, the more the light spread, scattering through the water like melted honey. Everything shimmered. The bubbles, the shells, even the sand seemed to glow from within. A gentle school of fish passed by, their scales flashing in a dozen shades of silver and blue. They moved around SpongeBob like a living current, guiding him toward open water. He followed, feeling their quiet confidence, the way they trusted the ocean completely. As he swam, he began to hum softly. The sound came out as a low vibration, carried by the water around him. It wasn't a song he knew. It was something the moment gave him a melody, born of the morning tide. The hum of the ocean joined in. The rhythm of bubbles and waves created a harmony so subtle, so tender, it almost felt like the sea itself was singing with him. When he paused, the world seemed to pause too. The stillness that followed was warm and full, like silence after laughter. Ahead, the forest began to thin. The tall kelp stalks grew farther apart until they were just scattered strands swaying behind him. The open ocean stretched before him, now vast, endless, shining softly under the surface light. He turned for one last look at the kelp forest. In the morning glow, it looked like a dream, fading edges soft, colors gentle. The light filtered through the tall strands like rays through cathedral glass. For a moment, it didn't even look real, more like a memory. SpongeBob waved. "Thank you for letting me rest," he said quietly. And then he turned back toward home. The water grew shallower as he moved. Rays of sunlight painted bright patches across the sand. Starfish lay curled like sleeping hands, and tiny crabs scurried between rocks, already busy with their morning routines. He passed a small sea cave that he remembered exploring long ago with Patrick. The entrance glowed faintly blue, and the thought made him chuckle. He could almost hear Patrick's laughter echoing inside, loud, carefree, perfectly silly. The sound, though imaginary, filled him with warmth. He imagined waking up back in his pineapple house, Gary stretching, meowing softly for breakfast. The idea made his heart feel light. He missed home, but he was in no hurry. The sea was still holding him close, gently, as if it wanted him to savor every bit of this journey. The bubbles from his movement rose and twisted above him, catching sunlight until they disappeared near the surface. Each one reflected a tiny whirl, a reflection of the kelp forest, of SpongeBob himself, of the ocean above. He watched them go one by one and whispered softly, "See you later." Even the current seemed to slow as he reached the final stretch of water before Bikini Bottom. The colors shifted from the deep emeralds of the forest to soft turquoise, then pale gold. The ocean floor began to sparkle more clearly, bits of coral, shells, and smooth pebbles shining in the dawn. The light here was brighter now, almost white in places. It sparkled across the surface like tiny stars being born underwater. The ocean no longer felt like a dream. It felt like morning awake, gentle, alive. SpongeBob stopped for a moment, closing his eyes again. He floated still, letting the sun wash over him through the waves. His thoughts softened, fading into one simple feeling: gratitude. For the night, for the peace, for the quiet rhythm of the world. When he opened his eyes, the outline of his pineapple home was faintly visible through the water's golden glow. He smiled again softly. It was time to go home. The closer SpongeBob drifted to Bikini Bottom, the more the ocean began to hum with quiet life again. Not the busy, clattering sound of a daytime rush. This was gentler, softer, like the ocean was stretching after a long nap. Small bubbles rose from the sand, and the faint shimmer of the sun spread in golden threads through the water, stitching light between the sea plants. He passed a familiar coral arch, the same one he swam under every morning on his way to the Krusty Krab. But today it looked different. The sunlight caught in the coral tips, making them look like candles burning under the waves. The light felt warmer than usual, as if the sea itself was greeting him back. SpongeBob slowed his swim, not wanting the moment to end. His hands brushed over the sandy floor, and a tiny current of cool water passed over his fingertips, a good morning handshake from the ocean. He whispered, "Good morning, Wool," and his voice was carried away by the water drifting far and soft. Above him, the surface glittered like glass. From far away it looked still, but up close there were tiny ripples everywhere, catching the light and bending it into rainbows. The colors danced on SpongeBob's face as he looked upward. Gold, blue, and soft rose tones, the kind of morning hues that make everything feel forgiven. He could almost hear the surface calling him home. Each flicker of light felt like an invitation. "Come back today, little sponge." He smiled, a sleepy, content smile that only comes after a night well spent in peace. As he swam upward, he passed schools of shimmering fry just waking up, darting in playful spirals before breakfast. Seagrass waved lazily in the current, brushing against his legs like a slow morning breeze. Even the old anchor, sunk halfway into the sand, seemed to glow faintly, as if it, too, was warming in the sun. Then, through the growing brightness, SpongeBob saw the outline of the Bargain Mart sign in the distance, faint but still glowing slightly from the night before. He felt a wave of gentle fondness. That quiet store, now bustling once again with early shoppers and sleepy clerks, had given him the gift of rest, a stillness that he carried with him now. He waved toward it from afar, even though he knew no one could see him. "See you again soon," he said softly. And somehow he thought he saw the glass doors shimmer as if the store waved back. The world above Bikini Bottom was now glowing brighter by the second. The rooftops of homes began to shimmer with morning light. Jellyfish floated lazily through the streets, their tendrils glowing softly, like lanterns left out after dawn. Everything looked half dream, half day, that beautiful space between sleep and waking. SpongeBob finally reached the soft, sandy hill leading up to his pineapple house. He paused, looking up at it with quiet affection. The windows gleamed faintly, catching the golden rays pouring through the sea. Inside, he could see Gary sleeping curled up, his shell rising and falling slowly. SpongeBob floated for a moment, hands clasped behind his back, feeling the warmth of the morning fill him up. He didn't rush to enter. Instead, he simply watched, listened, breathed. The hum of the ocean was brighter now, filled with the gentle sounds of waking life, the chirp of distant clams opening, the soft whoosh of passing rays, and the light fizz of bubbles escaping the sand. Everything seemed to sing the same word, renewal. He turned slowly, taking in the world around him, the kelp swaying, the colors deepening, the movement of the sea growing lively again. Every detail glowed, every current carried life. This was what he loved about mornings, not the energy or the rush, but the quiet beginning, the first breath of a new day. He opened the front door gently, trying not to wake Gary just yet. The familiar smell of home seawater, soap, and a little bit of pineapple sweetness filled the space around him. It felt comforting, grounding, like slipping into a warm blanket. He placed his jellyfishing net by the door and took a moment to tidy his shoes, still humming the faint tune from his dream. Gary stirred a little and meowed softly, blinking one sleepy eye open. "Good morning, buddy," SpongeBob whispered, smiling. "You won't believe the dream I had." Gary purred quietly, curling back into his shell as if to say, "Tell me later." SpongeBob chuckled softly and floated to his favorite chair. He sat down slowly, the gentle creak of the seat mixing with the whisper of bubbles outside the window. Through the glass, he could still see the edge of the kelp forest, golden and green under the sunlight. It didn't look far now, but it felt like another world entirely. He leaned back, resting his hands behind his head. Outside, the ocean rippled softly in golden light. Inside, and everything was still. The moment stretched calm, whole, perfect. He thought about the forest stillness, the glowing path, the peaceful silence of the sleeping sea creatures. And he realized something. Maybe the ocean didn't really sleep or wake the way he did. Maybe it simply breathed, and he was lucky enough to breathe with it for a while. That thought made him close his eyes again, not from tiredness, but from peace. Minutes passed like seconds. The golden light shifted slowly through his window, casting faint, moving patterns across his walls. Each flicker of brightness danced across the edges of his furniture, his bookshelf, his jellyfishing trophies, the framed photo of him and Patrick laughing on a jellyfishing trip. The world was fully awake now, but SpongeBob didn't move just yet. He stayed perfectly still, listening to the soft rhythm of the water outside the slow, steady beat that reminded him he was home. His breathing matched the ocean's rhythm. Inhale, exhale, wave, tide. Somewhere outside, a bubble popped quietly, a tiny sound, yet perfectly placed. The kind of detail that only exists in the calm of morning. SpongeBob smiled without opening his eyes. "It's a good day," he murmured. And for a while, that was enough. In the distance, the bargain mart stood once more in daylight, shelves restocked, carts clinking softly, the open sign glowing proudly in the window. But if one looked closely, they might notice a quiet shimmer in the corner aisles, a faint memory of the night before. The shelves still remembered the hush. The lights still hummed in rhythm with the sea. The calm lingered, like a soft echo refusing to fade. And in that balance between motion and stillness, work and rest, day and dream, the ocean continued its endless lullaby. For those who listened closely, it never stopped.